Morning, my son's girlfriend told me that the smell of my coffee was giving her a headache. Something in me went very quiet. Not angry, not even surprised. Just quiet, the way a room goes quiet when the last light gets switched off. I was standing at my own kitchen stove at 6 in the morning, the way I do every day before a shift. My old percolator was doing its slow, reliable thing on the burner. The smell was strong and dark and good, the kind that used to wake my late husband before his alarm ever could. I had one hand wrapped around my favorite mug, the ceramic one my sister Carol sent from Savannah with a little painted lighthouse on the side, and I was watching the morning come through the window the way I like to do before the world gets too loud. That was when Rachel appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a silk sleep mask pushed up on her forehead and an oversized sweatshirt I'm fairly certain belonged to my son. She squinted at me like I was something she'd accidentally stepped on. "Margaret," she said, and she had this way of saying my name that always felt like a small correction. "The coffee smell comes right through the walls. I can't sleep." I looked at her for a moment. Then I looked at my percolator. "It's 6:15, I said. She blinked. "I know what time it is. I have a pickup at 7. She sighed and lifted both hands in that way she had, like patience was something she was generously extending to me. "I'm just saying, maybe you could use one of those pod things? They don't smell as much." I took a slow sip from my mug. The coffee tasted the way it always did, like mine. "I've been making coffee this way for 40 years, I said. Rachel smiled tightly. "Well?" She turned back toward the hallway. Something to think about. I listened to her footsteps disappear back down the hall toward what used to be my guest room, the room where I had once kept an armchair, a good reading lamp, and a small bookshelf full of things that mattered to me. Now it held a king-size bed they'd brought in pieces and a collection of skincare products that had taken over the entire bathroom counter, like a slow, expensive invasion. I finished my coffee standing at the window. Outside, the maple in the side yard was still dark against the pale sky. Somewhere, 2 streets over, a garbage truck rumbled through the neighborhood. The house was mine. I'd bought it with my husband Dennis in 1989, the year my son Kevin was 4 years old. The year we painted the front door red because Dennis said a red door means welcome. We finished paying it off in 2011. Dennis passed 3 years later. I had been living here alone for a decade before Kevin called and said he and Rachel needed somewhere to stay. Just for a little while, he said. Things were tight. The lease on their apartment had ended and they hadn't found a new place yet. Just 3 months, maybe 4. That had been 22 months ago. I set my mug in the sink, grabbed my jacket, and went to work. My Uber Eats shift usually ran from 7 to noon, sometimes longer if the tips were good and my hands weren't aching too badly. I drove a reliable gray sedan that was 9 years old and still ran clean. It smelled like every order I'd ever carried. Coffee, fried chicken, Indian food, once a whole stack of French toast that got syrup on the floor mat and left a sweetness I never fully got out. Rachel had mentioned the car smell twice. Mentioned it the way you mention something you find slightly pathetic. Not with cruelty exactly, just with the casual contempt of someone who believes their standards are better than yours. I liked driving. I always had. Dennis and I used to take long Sunday drives nowhere in particular, just to see things move past the windows. Driving gave me the same feeling now, a sense of being in motion when everything else felt like it had stopped. That morning I carried a breakfast order to a law office downtown, 2 breakfast burritos and a green juice to a woman in a yoga studio parking lot, and a bag of cinnamon rolls to an address in a neighborhood with wide, quiet streets and old elm trees. The woman who answered the door was maybe 80. She took the bag and pressed a $5 bill into my hand, even though she'd already tipped through the app. "You're out early," she said like it was a compliment. "I like early," I told her. She smiled. "Me too. My daughter keeps telling me to slow down. I keep telling her that slowing down is what does you in." I thought about that the whole drive home. Kevin was awake when I got back, which was unusual. He was normally still horizontal at noon. He was sitting at the kitchen table in his gray sweats, eating cereal directly from a large mixing bowl, scrolling something on his phone with one thumb. "Hey, Mom." He didn't look up. "Rachel said you woke her up again." I set my keys on the hook by the door. I made coffee. Yeah, she's sensitive to smells in the morning. She's been sensitive to a lot of things lately. He glanced up now, just briefly. Come on, don't be like that. I opened the refrigerator. I had bought groceries 3 days ago. The produce store was nearly empty. A container of the pasta salad I'd made Sunday was gone. So was most of the orange juice. Did you two eat the pasta salad? I asked. Kevin shrugged. It was just sitting there. It had been sitting there because I was going to have it for lunch 3 days in a row, which was exactly the kind of math you do when you are 68 years old and doing gig work to cover property taxes and 2 extra people's utilities usage. I closed the refrigerator without saying that. Kevin, I said, have you two heard back on any apartments? He made a non-committal sound and turned a page on his phone. It's tough right now. Everything's expensive. It's been expensive for 2 years. Mom. He said it the way you say it to end a conversation, not to begin one. Rachel appeared in the kitchen doorway then, finally dressed, holding her phone in one hand and a to-go coffee cup in the other. Not coffee from my percolator, something she'd ordered through a delivery app, brought straight to the front door. $8.40 probably. I knew because I'd carried enough of them to know the cups. Morning, she said, mainly to Kevin. Then to me, pleasantly enough, do we have any of that good creamer left? It's in the door, I said. She opened the refrigerator, looked at the nearly empty shelf without commenting, took the creamer, added some to her delivered coffee, and put it back. Then she sat down next to Kevin, and they both looked at their phones in a companionable silence that made the kitchen feel very small. I made myself a second cup of coffee with my percolator at full strength. Neither of them said anything. That evening, I took the folder out from the back of my closet. It was a plain brown one I'd kept on the high shelf for years, behind the extra blankets in a shoebox of old photographs. Inside were the house documents, the deed, the title, the paid-off mortgage statement, the property insurance renewal. I spread them on the kitchen table after Kevin and Rachel had gone upstairs for the night. My name, Margaret Ann Hollis. Just mine. Dennis had insisted on that years before he got sick, on one of those practical evenings when he sat me down and said quietly that we needed to make sure certain things were clear. Just in case, he said. I understood now in a way I hadn't then. I sat there for a while looking at the papers. Then I picked up my phone and sent a text to my sister Carol. Are you still serious about the apartment near you? She replied in under 2 minutes, the way Carol always does. Margaret Hollis, it has been sitting here with your name on it for 6 months. Call me. I smiled at that and put the phone face down on the table. Then I sat there a little longer listening to the house, a floorboard settling, the refrigerator hum, Rachel's voice faintly through the ceiling laughing at something on her laptop, Kevin's low answering murmur. The house had held a lot of living. It still smelled faintly of the rosemary Dennis used to grow in a pot on the windowsill. I had kept that pot for 2 years after he died, even after the plant was long gone, until one morning I finally moved it to the garage and let myself stop pretending. I thought about what the woman with the cinnamon rolls had said. Slowing down is what does you in. I picked up my phone again and called Carol. 3 days later, something happened that made the folder on the high shelf feel suddenly urgent. I came home from a morning shift to find a car I didn't recognize in my driveway, a white BMW, clean, probably a lease. Rachel was standing on the front porch talking to a man in a blazer who was holding a clipboard and looking at the front of my house the way people look at things they're appraising. I pulled up slowly and got out. Rachel spotted me and her expression did something complicated. Oh, she said. You're back early. It's 12:30, I said. Who is this? The man in the blazer turned and extended a hand with a practiced warmth. Mrs. Hollis? I'm Tom Pierce from Pierce & Associates. Your daughter-in-law mentioned she's not my daughter-in-law, I said. A small silence. Tom Pierce recalibrated smoothly. Of course. Rachel mentioned you've been here quite a while and that the property is paid off. I was just giving her some preliminary information about the current market. Comparable sales in the neighborhood have been very strong, and I didn't ask for that information, I said. Rachel jumped in quickly. Margaret, I just thought it would be good to have options, for the future. Kevin and I have been talking about eventually getting into something, and we figured if you ever decided to downsize, it would make sense too. I looked at her for a moment. Then I looked at the man with the clipboard. Mr. Pierce, I said, I'm not selling. Thank you for stopping by. He nodded pleasantly, handed me a card I didn't ask for, and walked back to his BMW. Rachel waited until his car had backed out before she turned toward me. You didn't have to be rude, she said. I was polite, I said. I said thank you. She made a sound with her teeth. Kevin and I are just thinking long term. You can't live in this big house forever. It's not a big house, I said. It's 1,200 square feet. You know what I mean. I walked past her toward the front door. Rachel, I said without turning around, how much do you pay each month toward the mortgage here? She didn't answer. The utilities? Silence. The groceries? I opened the front door. Something to think about, I said, and went inside. Kevin came home that evening and found me at the kitchen table with the folder open again. He looked at it, then at me, and his expression had that particular quality he'd had since he was a teenager, that half-defensive, half-appeasing look he used when he could sense something was coming but wasn't sure what direction. Mom, about today. Sit down, I said. He sat. I want to ask you something directly, I said. Are you two planning to use this house as a down payment? Kevin opened his mouth, closed it. The equity, I said. Is that the plan? He looked at the table. It wasn't like some scheme or anything. We were just talking about what options might exist eventually. If I ever what? He didn't answer. I folded my hands on top of the deed and looked at my son. He was 38 years old. His father's jaw, my father's eyes. He had been a good kid once, the kind who left notes on the refrigerator and remembered your coffee order. Somewhere in the last decade, something had shifted, or maybe I had just stopped paying attention to the shift. Kevin, I said, I have been carrying this house alone for 10 years. I have been carrying it with 2 extra people in it for almost 2 years. I want you to understand something. He met my eyes. I am 68 years old, I said. I get up before sunrise to deliver other people's breakfast. I pay the electric bill here, the water, the internet you use, the property taxes, the insurance. I bought groceries last Tuesday and they were gone in 3 days. I don't say these things to shame you. I say them because I want you to hear them out loud. Kevin was quiet for a long time. Then softly, I know. Do you? He rubbed a hand over his face. Things have just been hard. They've been hard for me too, I said. And that ended the conversation. I waited until they were both asleep. Then I called Carol back and told her to hold the apartment. Hello, friends. This is Erica. The woman in our story, Margaret, is 68 years old. She wakes up before sunrise to go to work, and her son's girlfriend invites a real estate agent to the house without asking. Tell me, have you ever had someone treat something you built like it already belonged to them? The next morning, I made my coffee at 6 the way I always do. Full strength, no apologies. Rachel didn't come out of the bedroom until 10. Kevin left around 9 for what he called a freelance meeting, though I had stopped asking about those a year ago when it became clear they were more theoretical than actual. I spent the quiet hours between pickups doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened my laptop and looked at the numbers. The house, what it would sell for in this market, the apartment near Carroll in Savannah, what it would cost. The gap between those 2 numbers was significant. Significant enough to mean something. Significant enough to mean a lot of things. I called a woman named Dorothy Briggs, whose number I'd gotten from my friend Paulette, who said Dorothy was the most honest realtor she'd ever worked with. Dorothy answered on the second ring, and when I explained what I was thinking, she said, "Tell me about the property." I told her. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths. The maple in the side yard, the red front door Dennis painted. Paid off, good bones, updated kitchen from 2018. Neighborhood? Dorothy asked. I told her. She made a sound that meant something. Mrs. Hollis, that is a very sellable house right now. How fast are you thinking? Fast, I said. Is that possible? In this market? Sometimes the right house moves in a week. I looked out the window at the maple tree. Dennis had planted that tree the year Kevin started first grade. It was twice as tall as the house now. I have 2 adult occupants, I said. They don't know yet. Dorothy was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then, I understand completely. Can I come take a look Thursday morning? I'll be here at 8, I said. I didn't sleep much that night, but not because I was anxious. I lay there in the dark and felt, strangely, like something had already been decided. Like the decision had been forming quietly for a long time and had simply been waiting for me to catch up to it. In the room down the hall, Rachel's white noise machine hummed steadily. She had brought it with her when they moved in, explaining that she needed total silence to sleep. The irony of that had never quite left me. Dorothy arrived Thursday at exactly 8. She drove a sensible dark blue sedan, wore no-nonsense flats, and shook my hand like she meant it. I had already done my first delivery and come back. Kevin and Rachel were still asleep. Dorothy moved through the house with a calm, observant eye. She didn't make the room sound like a magazine. She just looked at them honestly, paused at the kitchen window, noted the light, tested the faucet in the second bathroom, stood in the doorway of what had been Dennis's small home office, and said quietly, "This is a thoughtful space." "My husband used it," I said. She nodded once, the way some people do when they understand something without needing it explained. 3 bedrooms show very well for buyers with children, she said, or buyers who want options. We were sitting at the kitchen table going over her notes when Kevin came downstairs. He was in his usual state, wrinkled t-shirt, hair from a dream, blinking at the daylight. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Dorothy with the expression of someone who'd walked into the wrong movie. "Morning," Dorothy said pleasantly. Kevin looked at me. "Who's this?" "Dorothy Briggs," I said. "She's a realtor." A pause. "What for?" I poured myself a 3rd cup of coffee. "I'm thinking of selling the house." Kevin's face did several things in quick succession. Surprise, then something that wanted to be dismissal, then something that looked closer to recognition. "Mom." "Good morning," I said. "You can't just—" He stopped himself. Started again. "Can we talk about this? We are talking." Dorothy began reviewing some paperwork with quiet efficiency, giving us a kind of professional privacy. Kevin came fully into the kitchen and sat down. "What's going on?" "Nothing new," I said. "I'm just making a decision." He rubbed his eyes. "Because of the realtor thing with Rachel." "Among other things." He was quiet. I could see him cycling through responses the way he used to as a teenager when he knew an argument wouldn't work, and he wasn't sure what the next move was. "Where would you go?" he finally asked. "Near Carroll," I said. "In Savannah." He blinked. "Savannah?" He blinked. "Savannah? You've been planning this." "I've been thinking about it," I said. "There's a difference." "Well," he spread his hands. "What about us?" I looked at him evenly. "What about you?" He seemed genuinely unprepared for that question, which told me everything. Dorothy closed her folder softly. "Mrs. Moose, Hollis, I have everything I need. I can have a listing strategy ready by Monday. Depending on pricing and timing, I think you'll see interest very quickly." She stood and shook my hand again. Then she looked at Kevin with a professional, neutral warmth. "You have a lovely home." Kevin watched her go without saying anything. After the front door closed, he turned back to me. "How serious is this?" "Serious," I said. He stared at the table. Rachel is not on the deed, Kevin." He looked up. "Your name isn't either," I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. He sat with that for a moment. Then, how much time would we have? 30 days after closing, typically. He was quiet. I watched him begin, slowly and visibly, to understand the difference between visiting a situation and living in it. Rachel took it differently. I told her that afternoon when she came down for what passed as her lunch, sometime around 1. I said it simply. I was selling the house. I'd spoken with a realtor. The listing would go live within the week. She laughed. The same kind of laugh that carries no humor inside it. "You're being dramatic," she said. I'm selling the house, I repeated. Because of the coffee thing? Her voice pitched up. Margaret, that was not a big deal. It wasn't about the coffee, I said. Then what? I looked at her for a long moment. At the $8 delivered coffee cup sitting on my counter. At the skincare products lined up on the windowsill above my sink because the bathroom counter had run out of room. At the way she stood in my kitchen with her weight shifted to one hip, arms crossed, waiting for me to explain myself. You invited a real estate agent to my house, I said, to discuss using my equity without asking me. She had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable for exactly 1 second. Then, that was just preliminary information. Kevin doesn't own this house, I said. And neither do you. She stared at me. So you're punishing us. I'm making a decision about my property. Her jaw tightened. This is unbelievable, we live here. You stay here, I said. There's a difference. She turned and walked back down the hallway. A moment later, I heard her voice rise behind the bedroom door. Kevin's name. Then the door shut firmly. I washed the coffee cup she'd left on my counter. Then I took out a container of lentil soup from the freezer, the batch I'd made last weekend, and set it on the counter to thaw. Small acts of ordinary life. That's what holds you steady when everything else is tilting. Friends, can you imagine? Someone bringing a stranger into your home to discuss selling your house as though you'd already agreed to disappear from it. Margaret kept her voice calm, but calm is sometimes the most powerful thing you can carry into a room. Would you have stayed that quiet? The listing went live the following Tuesday. Dorothy had done her work thoroughly. The photographs were clean and honest. Natural light in the kitchen, the maple tree visible through the window above the sink, the red front door exactly as Dennis had painted it all those years ago. She priced it right, she said. Not flashy, just true to the market and to the house. By noon, she had texted me twice. 3 showing requests already. One couple asking about a fast timeline. I was sitting in a parking lot off Broad Street waiting for an order when her second message came in. I read it, set the phone in the cup holder, and looked out at the street. A woman walked past with a stroller and a to-go cup. 2 men in hard hats stood outside a building eating sandwiches. Ordinary Tuesday, ordinary lives. Mine felt, for the first time in a long time, like it was pointing in a direction I had chosen. When I got home that afternoon, Kevin was at the kitchen table with his laptop open and the expression of a man confronting a problem he can no longer treat as theoretical. He had rental listings pulled up on the screen, real ones. 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, deposit requirements, pet policies. Rachel was on the couch with her own phone talking quietly. I heard the words my mother. Then I heard I know, and then she walked toward the bedroom when she saw me come in. Kevin looked up. The listing is really live. Yes. He turned the laptop slightly. Rents are terrible right now. I know. A 2-bedroom near us is $2,200 a month. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door. That's not uncommon. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't realize how expensive things had gotten. I looked at him. Kevin, I've been paying the mortgage, utilities, and groceries here for 2 years while you two figured it out. Did you think those things were free? He didn't answer, which was at least honest. I'm not saying this to be unkind, I told him. I'm saying it because it's true and someone should say it clearly. He looked at his hands. I know we've taken advantage. That surprised me. I hadn't expected it said out loud. I think Rachel more than me, he added, and then caught himself. No, both of us. I should have pushed harder on the apartment search. I kept saying things were hard and just staying. You did, I agreed. He looked up at me. He had Dennis's eyes, and sometimes that still caught me off guard. Are you really going to Savannah? Yes. Carol's there. She's been there 3 years. I should have gone sooner. Kevin nodded slowly. He turned back to the laptop and scrolled through listings with a new focus, something that looked more like a man solving a problem than avoiding one. Rachel came back into the kitchen. She'd been crying, though she was trying not to show it. She looked at Kevin, then at me, and seemed to decide something. I called my mother, she said. She said we could stay with her for a month while we find something. Kevin looked up. Rachel sat down next to him. She didn't look at me when she said it, but she said it in my direction. We should have had this sorted out a long time ago. We knew it. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to honesty she'd offered in 22 months, and I recognized it for what it was. 30 days is plenty of time, I said. Dorothy called that evening while I was on the back porch with a cup of tea. The sky had gone that particular dark gold. It goes in October just before it shifts to gray. The maple tree was full color, red and amber, and the light was catching it in a way that made it look like something deliberate. "Helen," Dorothy said, then caught herself. "Margaret, I have two very strong offers. One is at asking. One is 12,000 over." I closed my eyes for a moment, listened to the leaves. "Tell me about the second one," I said. The buyers were a couple in their early 40s, Dorothy told me. He was an architect. She worked in hospital administration. They had one daughter, a 5-year-old. They'd been looking for something in the neighborhood for 8 months. "They want a fast close," Dorothy said. 30 days? They love the maple tree." I opened my eyes and looked at it. "And the red door," Dorothy added. They specifically mentioned the red door. Dennis had painted that door the year we moved in, because he said a red door meant welcome. 31 years later, a family with a 5-year-old daughter would walk through it and start filling the rooms with their own kind of living. "Tell them yes," I said. The quiet that followed felt like something completing itself. Inside the house, through the kitchen window, I could see Kevin at the table. He was on the phone now, his posture different from how it had been for 2 years. Upright, purposeful, listening. He had a pen in his hand and was writing something down on a notepad, the way people do when they're not just talking but actually making something happen. I finished my tea. The evening was getting cold in the way October evenings do, suddenly and without apology. I thought about Carol, about the apartment near the river in Savannah that she had been holding for me for 6 months, in a brick building with a small balcony and a farmer's market 2 blocks away on Saturday mornings. I thought about driving down on a Tuesday, with nothing urgent anywhere, about making coffee at 6 in the morning with no explanation owed to anyone. I thought about Dennis saying very quietly on a gray Sunday a year before he got sick that the best thing he'd ever done was make sure this house was mine, just in case, he said. I'd thought he meant in case of something bad. Now I understood he meant something larger than that. He meant in case of freedom, in case of a Tuesday morning when I needed something to be entirely, legally, without question, mine. Sometimes love is that practical. Kevin found me on the porch a little later. He had his jacket on and was carrying 2 cups of tea, which he hadn't done unprompted in years. He handed me one and sat in the other chair without saying anything for a minute. We just sat there in the dark together, listening to the maple tree. "Rachel's sister has a 2-bedroom, he said finally. "Cheaper than anything I found online." "That's good. We'd have to move by the 30th. You can manage that." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Mom, I'm sorry, I mean it. Not just for the real estate thing. For all of it." I looked at him. My son. 38 years old and finally sounding like it. "I know," I said. "Dad would have said we were being idiots. He would have said it nicer than that." Kevin smiled slightly. "No, he wouldn't have. That was true. Dennis had been kind but exact. No room for comfortable nonsense." "What's Carol's place like?" Kevin asked. "Small," I said. "Quiet. Good light," she says, "near the water. You always liked being near water. Your father and I drove to the coast every year. You probably don't remember." "I remember," he said. "You always got the clam chowder even when it was too hot for soup." I had forgotten he knew that. I looked at him and felt something shift in my chest, the way things do when you realize that love and frustration have been living inside the same room for so long that you stop telling them apart. "Call me when you're settled," I said. "I will." We sat there until the cold made us go in. 18 days after I accepted the offer, I packed the last of the boxes. The house had been emptying in the way houses do, gradually at first and then all at once. Kevin and Rachel had moved out on a Saturday, carrying boxes to a rented van with the help of Rachel's sister, who turned out to be considerably more grounded than Rachel herself. Kevin hugged me before he left, a real one, the kind that holds on a second longer than it needs to. Rachel said take care, which was the most sincere thing she'd managed, and I told her the same and meant it. After that, the house got very quiet. Not the tense kind of quiet from before. A different kind entirely. The kind that comes when a space is finally just itself again. I kept the last few days slow on purpose. I sat on the back porch in the evenings with my tea. I made my coffee every morning at 6 with the percolator, full strength, no apology. I took my time with the rooms, not sadly, just honestly. The scuff on the hallway floor from the year Kevin moved his bedroom furniture around at 15. The place above the fireplace where a watercolor used to hang before I gave it to Carol. The windowsill in the kitchen where Dennis's rosemary pot once lived. On the last morning, I made coffee and sat at the table with it for a long time. The maple tree was visible through the window, bare now, its branches tracing quiet lines against a pale November sky. In a few months, a 5-year-old would stand at this window, watching it come back into leaf. She would probably touch the red door on her way in and out 100 times without knowing why it was painted that color, without knowing that a man named Dennis Hollis chose it in 1989 because he believed that a red door meant welcome. I hoped the house would feel like that for them. I left the key on the counter the way Dorothy asked me to. I took my lighthouse mug from the cabinet, my husband's watch from the windowsill, the photograph of Dennis and me at the coast the year before he got sick, and the old percolator wrapped in a dish towel and placed carefully in the passenger seat. I locked the front door behind me and walked to my car. The morning was cold and bright. The maple tree stood over the driveway, bare and steady. I sat there for a moment in the driver's seat. Not to be sad, just to be in the moment before a thing is completely over. Then I started the engine and drove south. Carol had the apartment warm and her own coffee already made when I arrived, the good kind that came from a little independent shop 2 streets over. She hugged me at the door the way sisters do, and then she didn't say anything for a while, because she knew I didn't need her to. That first evening, I sat on the small balcony with my lighthouse mug and watched the river go dark with the hour. The water moved steadily in one direction, the way rivers do, the way some things do when you finally stop standing in front of them. My phone buzzed. Kevin. A photo of a living room, boxes everywhere, Rachel in the background carrying something. First night in the new place, smaller than I'm used to. Feels okay. I texted back. That's usually how the right things feel at first. He sent a thumbs up and then, a moment later, a small heart. I put the phone down and looked at the river again. Somewhere back in that house, a family was putting their daughter to bed in a room that had been a lot of things over the years. A nursery once. A study. A guest room that became something else. Now it would become whatever they needed it to be. That was the right ending for a room. And for a house. And I was beginning to understand, for me. I poured the last of my coffee. I was 68 years old. I was doing Uber Eats in a new city because I liked being in motion, and because the clam chowder at the place Carol had found on the waterfront was very good, and because a woman who drives other people's breakfasts around at dawn gets to see mornings that the rest of the world sleeps through, and because, it turned out, I had a great deal left to do. So, friends, that's Margaret's story. She didn't shout, she didn't argue, she just made one quiet decision and held on to it. Some people will say she was too hard, others will say she was too hard, others will say she waited too long. What do you think? Did Margaret do the right thing? I'd love to know in the comments below, and if this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Erica's Stories. We have a new story coming for you very soon.